In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the differences when you're printing a panorama and some crucial settings you need to think about. So first off, I wanted to go ahead and talk about a little bit more of an advanced feature within the print dialog box when you're in Photoshop. So if we see here, this image above is my file as I saw it on my screen, and this is the preview image in the print dialog box. When you're previewing in the print dialog box, there is this area down here that can help you better visualize how your print will end up looking compared to your file in Photoshop. One of these settings is the match print colors, and if you see from the file up here to the print preview, this red box is a different red than these two. So that has to do with the colors that the printer can actually print out versus the colors that are being shown on your screen. If we turned on this gamut warning, this would actually turn this entire box gray, and it'll turn any color that the printer cannot accurately print gray as well. So I like to turn this on and off, and sometimes I do this before I'm even really ready to print while I'm still editing in order to see if there's any color considerations that I need to think about. There's also this show paper white. If you remember from our other printing lecture, I talked about how when you're printing on paper, your print will often look a little bit darker than what you see on the screen. And that's because our screens are backlit, there's light coming back from them. Well, paper obviously is not backlit, it's just ink laying on paper. When you're getting ready to print, it's good to check this box on and off to see what the print is going to look like on the specific paper you are using. Now remember, the printer doesn't know what paper you're using unless you set an ICC profile. So make sure you set your ICC profile so the printer knows what you're printing on, and then play with this and check it on and off. So a lot of the steps with printing a panorama are similar to what we did when we talked about printing in our other lecture, such as saving your master file or working file, and then going to File Save As and saving a specific file just for printing and for the size that you will be printing in. In this situation, I was going to be printed on 10-inch paper, so I actually was going to resize my file to be 9.5 inches because I did want a 1/4 inch border on the top and bottom. So just like how we talked about in the previous print lecture, we want to make sure we go in and change the image size, and that's really going to depend on how big you're going to be printing, what size paper or roll paper you're going to be printing on. Now for really large prints, if you remember, for resolution on printing in general, we want 240 to 300. Now for really large prints, I usually just go with 240 just to save on file space a little bit. We also always need to convert to profile, so we're printing in the correct profile. Most of the time, if you're printing on a printer of your own, it's going to be Adobe RGB 1998. That's going to be true for a lot of print companies also, but I always recommend that you check the specifications for the specific print company on their website. There's usually somewhere where it talks about what type of color space you should have your files in. You also want to make sure you're doing a print sharpening layer, and just like we talked about before, this is just so that when that ink comes down on the paper, it's going to be a little bit softer than what you see on screen. So you really want to just sharpen your image so that it looks maybe a little bit, just a tad little bit too sharp than what you see on screen. So once it gets laid down on paper, it looks nice and sharp. We also want to do our print brightening. Same thing. Like I said, the paper is not backlit. Now for this file, if I'm printing a really big file, remember we usually like to do proof prints, which means we want to do a print with our settings so that we can change the settings if we want to. We want that file to have all those layers, and then we want to do the print and then maybe look at it and make some adjustments. But because this file would be so big, I would actually save this file And then do another save as and add flat to the end of the file name. So this is just so that we can flatten those layers, make the file smaller, and it's going to be a little bit easier for your computer and the printer to process. Usually I recommend saving your files for printing in TIFF or PSD. But again, with such a large file, I usually go with JPEG. You'll also find that a lot of the print companies online want JPEG as well, but this really depends on how professional they are. The more that these companies work with professional photographers, usually the more file formats they're willing to accept. So there are companies out there that will accept TIFF or PSD files, but some lower end printers will want JPEG. In this case, because it would be such a large file, I'm going to stick with JPEG. Now, something to think about when you're actually doing the printing is that we need to create our own custom size. We're not just doing 8 by 10 or 11 by 14 or a normal size. For our panoramas, it would be a custom size, and we'd be printing on roll paper. Roll papers usually come in lengths of 25 to 50 feet, and then the printer will cut the paper after you're done printing. So you need to tell Photoshop how big you want this size to actually be so it knows where to print and then where to cut. So in order to make a custom size, we would go over here to print settings, and this is after hitting Command P, you're going to File Print to open the print dialog box. You'd click on print settings, and then you would come over here to paper size. Next, you would come down to Manage Custom Sizes. Once you get into your custom sizes, you hit the little plus sign here to create a new custom size. You can see that on this printer, I had made a couple of different custom sizes to fit different print sizes. For the panorama that I was printing, it was going to be 45.09 inches. So I actually added a 1/2 inch so that I had that 1/4 inch border again of white space. Remember at the beginning I said I was going to be printing on a 10-inch roll, and so that meant that to have that 1/4 inch, the height of my file was going to be 9.5 inches. And then right here I have the border set in 0.25 inches all the way around. Now, if you're going to be printing with roll paper, you also have to tell the printer that that's what you're doing. So again, in the print settings box, you can go to Layout and then Printer Settings. Here you can set up the page so that you're using roll paper. You're going to change your media type to whatever type of paper it is, whether it's luster or glossy or matte, and we're going to keep all of these other settings the same. Another really important setting to think about when you're printing with roll paper is to make sure that the auto cut is turned on. If you accidentally leave it turned off, then it will print, but the printer won't actually cut the paper. You'll have to awkwardly try to do it with scissors and then try to get a nice straight cut later. So make sure that this normal cut is on. And before you print, you always want to check the preview pane, give a quick glance over all of your settings so that you know that everything is set up right. As I've talked about before, printing can be really expensive, and it's really the ink that gets super expensive, especially with the larger printers that are taking 8 or more inks. One cartridge can be anywhere from $60 to $200 each, depending on how big that ink tank is. So you don't want to waste any ink. The paper is actually the cheaper part about printing. So always make sure that you have everything set up right before you start printing. Now again, we always want to make sure that we are having Photoshop manage the colors. And we always want to set up our printer profile or ICC profile for the specific paper that we are using. And a really important thing to do when you're printing, I know sometimes you just want to like hit print and walk away, but if you're doing prints, you want to, like I said, not waste any of your ink. So you want to make sure that you are standing by the printer, watching it as it's printing, and looking for any issues such as little lines that come across. If you do see distinct vertical lines, then that means that there's usually a clogged head. And you want to stop the print job right then and there so you don't waste any ink. You go ahead and clean the heads, and then you go ahead and start a brand new print again. All right, so these are my tips for getting a great panorama print.